Advanced Financial Modeling, Topic 3, VBA for Finance, and Learning Objective number 2, DIM statements, option explicit, types, and debugging. So in this topic, we're going to cover some of the basics of VBA that's going to get you to more complex programs. So I want to talk about variables. So variables can be inserted in programs in a number of ways. So let's talk about this program we wrote, CAPM. We write this one's called CAPM2. So this program has 3 parameters, risk-free rate, beta, and RM. And I created a new variable right here, MRP, and I said MRP is equal to RM minus RF. And then notice I have CAPM2, that's got to agree with the name of the program, otherwise you'll get a value of 0. CAPM2 equals risk-free rate plus beta times MRC and function. And I went ahead and I insert this program into my spreadsheet, into the module and into the spreadsheet. And notice the program works, but it gives me an obvious wrong answer. We've already tested this. We know the answer is 9%. So that's important. You actually always test a program outside of the program to know what the expected value is. Because we know it's the risk-free rate, 2%, plus 1, the beta, times the difference between RM and RF, which is 7%. So 2 plus 7 is 9. So why is it giving me 2%? I'll give you an idea here. Notice that there's a misspelling here, MRC. However, VBA just assumes, oh, you just must have created a new variable, MRC, and every new variable starts out with a value of 0 as default. So even though you've created a variable called MRP and put RM minus RF, which is 7%, when you went ahead and made the calculation for CAPM2, you took the 2% risk-free rate, that's 2, plus beta of 1 times 0. So you got an answer of 2, which is obviously wrong. And what's scary about it is you don't get an error message because the program worked. It just assumed you knew what you're doing. So variables can be created dynamically, just like this case. MRP and MRC are dynamically created variables, or you can create them by first dimming them, meaning using a statement called dim, which declares the variable. Once you dim it or declare the variable, you can then only use it. It's an optional statement, dim. However, if you have at the top of your module a statement that says option explicit, then you're required to dim all dynamic variables. So, option explicit, it's a very important thing to understand. It's a VBA statement that's typed at the top of a module before functions or macros. So you'll see it at the top of the module before any functions. You can only list it once. It doesn't have to be in caps, by the way, but use the word option explicit. Once you put that in the module, every program that you write, you're required to use a dim statement whenever creating new variables. So if option explicit is at the top of the module here, so notice I have option explicit. If I then try to use my program here, function CAPM MRP equals RM minus RF, CAPM2 equals risk-free rate, and so when that happens, notice I get an error. You can do this on your own. I get a compile error in VBA. And it says variable not defined because you haven't defined MRP. So how would I write this program? If option explicit is at the top of your module, I'm going to dim MRP and I'm going to put as single. We'll see what that means in a minute. But I need to dim MRP. That means I can then use MRP. If I made the mistake of leaving this as MRC, I would then get an error when I tried to run the program that says MRC is undefined. So here's the main benefit, really the only benefit I see of option explicit statements. Many errors you're going to make when programming are just misspelling of words. Okay, and what the option explicit does, it forces you to declare your variables. That way later in the program, when you use that variable name and you misspell it, it'll give you an error, because it'll tell me if I use MRC here, I will get an error that MRC is not defined. So that's the main reason. It makes the program run faster. I'm sorry, it makes it easier for debugging. Now let's talk about why I wrote this as single. This is another optional statement. Whenever you declare variables, you can do an as statement that says what is the data type. Actually, notice up here I also did function capm2 as double. What am I referring to when I say as single, as double? It is the data type. It allows you to tell the user that, hey, this actually double stands for double precision floating decimal. And you can see there's a number of variable types in VBA. And you can see here's single, how much data it uses, double, how much data it uses. You can have other types as currency, decimal, integer, long integer, and you could also have strings, and you could have variant, which is actually the default type for all new variables in VBA, which allows both numbers and text. The downside of using everything as variant is it uses the most memory, which probably mattered in, say, 1991 when our computers couldn't do very much and the memory was an issue, but it doesn't really matter anymore. So I'm just going to tell you, I don't really care about these as statements. I don't really care if you say as double, as single, as string. Yes, it may help readers of the program know that you're expecting a number or a value string. Yes, it will make programs run a millisecond a little faster, but it really doesn't matter. But many programs you get from the web have these as statements, so I'm just letting you know when you start seeing as double, as single, as string, you could delete them all, but just letting you know what they are. All right, a couple other things to talk about debugging. You must always know the solution to a problem before you test it or before you write the program. So just like in our CAPM program, I knew the number was going to be 9%. So when I got 2, I knew it was an error. You may want to use option explicit and dim statements when you first write a program. And this is what I'll do. If I'm writing a very complex program, I'll use an option explicit and I'll dim my variables. But once I do that, I get rid of the option explicit at the top of the module, because there's other programs I may copy and paste that haven't declared the variables, and I get a bunch of errors. So I do use option explicit sometimes to write programs because it helps me save myself from misspellings. Do use comment lines. It helps users understand what you're writing, to tell the user what the variable is, what the calculations are doing. And you're not just telling the user, you're telling your future self. I write a lot of programs, 6 months later I use them, and I'm like, oh, what was I doing there? What is this program doing? So it's nice to have these comment lines. If you try to write a function in Excel that you've written in VBA and it doesn't exist, there's a couple things that could be happening. One is you've actually inserted the program, the function, in 2 separate modules, or you've put it in the same module twice. If you put the program name, say CAPM, exists in more than one module or twice in one module, VBA doesn't know which one to choose, so it just doesn't show up on the list to insert the program. So be careful. The main reason is, besides the fact that you haven't actually written the program, that there's 2 of those located in the program, or in VBA. All right, a couple other things I want to talk about. I'll call this whole screen here the Project Explorer. And that is when you hit Alt F11 or you select Developer tab, VBA, you wind up with this screen. We mostly care about what's going over here with the programs. Notice here I'm in Module 1 of this Excel file. Be careful. Be careful where you are at all times in this Project Explorer. And what I mean by that, if you're in PowerPoint and you're reading my PowerPoint and I tell you to write a program and you copy it and you hit Alt F11, you're going to be in VBA Editor, but up here it's going to say PowerPoint, because all the Microsoft programs have VBA. but you've just written a program in it for Excel function, but you've put it in PowerPoint or Word or something like that. So always look, what file am I in, and is this a module? All right, common mistakes. I already mentioned the one. You have a program in 2 modules, or the program listed twice in 1 module. Another common mistake, you go Alt F11 and you automatically start typing, but what you might notice is when you read up here, you're actually not in a module. Because if you double click and say this worksheet, say click on sheet 1, it's going to look like a module, and you're going to write a program, but that's not where VBA is looking for the programs. So make sure you're in a module. I tend to only have 1 module for every workbook. Another common mistake, you have an option statement that's not at the top of the module. Okay, so you put the option statement somewhere in the middle of the module, or you have duplicate option statements. You can only have 1 option explicit per module. And the most common thing is a variable misspelling, MRP versus MRC. So in this topic, we talked about dim statements, option explicit. And these 2 things go together. Data types, that uses the as object in VBA, as single, as string, as double. I tend not to use them. And we talked about some simple debugging ideas. Okay, so let's go on to our next topic.